are you going to run your freezer in a power outage? Hey, Provident Preppers, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Mike, the Provident Prepper Jr. I'm his son, and I want to show you my storage room today with my 3 nice freezers. We're going to talk about what to do when the power goes out and how to keep all that food cold. So one of the things we want to talk about is the pros and cons of having 1 big freezer or 3 small freezers like I have in my storage room. There are pros and cons to both. Now, before we get into those pros and cons, yes, I know I have stuff in my electrical panel, so before you start commenting that I'm blocking this and making a hazard, I know my storage room is small. You just got to do what you got to do, right? So these 3 small freezers enable me to not have all my eggs in one basket, if you will. The cool thing about this is if the power goes out or if 1 freezer goes out, I have 3 freezers to back up my food. So let's say that this freezer right here fails, I can transfer all this and stuff it into the other 2 freezers to make up for the 1 freezer that failed. Now, if you're limited on space, these small freezers are going to be a good way for you to go.
Yeah.
But let's look down at our power meter here. This small freezer here is pulling about, it varies a lot, but it's somewhere close to between 70 and 80 watts. Now, Dad's freezer, tell him about your freezer, Dad.
My freezer typically draws about 90 watts.
And it's twice as big as these.
Right.
So these small freezers that are 1/2 of his freezer pull almost the same amount of energy as a big freezer, but if you don't have the space, then you buy the little freezer and you do what you got to do. But if you have the space, you may consider buying a freezer that is more energy efficient. That means that you'll be able to run your freezers for longer on your battery bank when the power goes out.
Yeah. So again, the first thing that you need to do is figure out how much energy you're going to need. These little meters are great. There's a label on these appliances, but these meters are so good at telling you not only instantaneously what they're using, but also over time. You can just plug that in for a month and then you have a really good feel as to how much energy that's going to take to run each day.
And another thing you have to consider is where you keep your freezer, because if you keep your freezer out in the hot garage during the summer, you're going to be using a lot more energy than if you keep it in a cool basement. All of these are things that you must consider when planning for a power outage. Let's talk about how you're going to run your freezers when the power goes out. It could be with one of these battery banks like these Jackery ones. We've already done a video about these Jackery power stations. Awesome product. Check it out. It's in the link below. Or maybe you're running your freezers with a gas or propane powered generator. All you got to do is figure out how much you can generate to know how long you can power your freezers for and what you can power with that generator or battery bank. Let's look at these Jackeries, for example. This little Jackery right here, this could probably run one of these freezers, but maybe for an hour or an hour and a half, and that's it, and then it'll be done. So you're going to want to choose something that's a little bit larger so that to buy you enough time for the power to come back on. This is the Jackery 1000 right here, and I think it would probably run these freezers for several days, and it would buy you a lot of time if you needed to. Maybe you want a bigger one if you have a bigger freezer, or you are worried about having extended power outages. If you've got a propane or a gasoline power generator, as long as you've got enough fuel, you should be able to run most chest freezers for as long as you have fuel.
So the goal here is to keep our food at a safe temperature. We don't have to keep it at 0. They normally recommend you keep your freezer at about 0. And there's some good reasons for that. One of those is that when you take a big, say you deboned a turkey and it's still warm, you put it in there, you want that cold enough in there that it's not going to seriously impact that temperature in your freezer. But that aside, what we need to do is make sure we keep our temperature cold enough to protect our food. So if we keep that at maybe 25, we maybe have a range of 20 to 25, and we get it down to 20 degrees, and then when it gets back up to 25 degrees, then we're going to plug it back in again to make sure that we keep it at a safe temperature.
And the beauty of this is that you don't have to run these freezers all the time in order to make this happen. All you need to do is monitor the temperature inside your freezers, and when it gets above that 25, it's probably time to go get your power station and plug this in. And that might only be every day or every 2 days, depending on how often you open it, and also where you store this. During a power outage, it's better to have these freezers in a cool place like in a basement than in a hot garage. So consider that as well. But let's talk about how to monitor the temperatures here.
This is cool.
Yeah.
You want to see this.
Yeah. This is a wireless fridge and freezer thermometer. This little receiver is linked to 2 of these. You just stick them in the freezer and it tells you the temperature in there. So right now it says in this freezer right here, it's 5 degrees.
And this one that's in my hand is at 64 degrees.
So when the power goes out, you just look at this and make sure that your temperatures are always below 25. Let's talk about the science of keeping food cold real quick. I'm a science teacher. That's what I do for a living. Let's talk about this real quick. I'm going to draw on this box up here. One of the things that you don't want to do with your freezer is ever let it get above 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And here's why. I'm going to draw a little graph here. This is the amount of energy on the x-axis, and this is the temperature on the y-axis. This is the same thing I teach to my students. When you have a solid, so like ice in a freezer, we're going to label this as solid. As soon as that solid gets to 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it starts to melt. But in order to melt, to go through that phase change, you have to absorb a whole bunch of energy, and the temperature never changes during that time. And as soon as everything is melted, then the temperature is going to start going up as it absorbs energy. So here's one of the reasons why you never want the food in your freezer to get to that 32, because you're absorbing a whole bunch of energy. You may say like, wow, look how long my food can stay good at 32 degrees, but that's not a good thing, because you are taking a whole bunch of energy to melt all that food. And then when it comes time to cool your freezer back down, you're going to burn through your battery bank or have to run your generator for hours and hours to reverse that and get back through this, what we call latent heat, to the solid form again. So be really careful. I think that we've agreed that the safe temperature is 25 degrees. If you can stay below 25, that will account for all the differences and maybe temperature inaccuracies or differences in freezing points at different elevations, stuff like that. So keep it below 25 and you never run into this issue of absorbing a whole bunch of energy at 32 degrees.
One of the things that you should consider when you're thinking about buying a freezer is the fact that a chest freezer is far more efficient than an upright freezer. And you know, I know there are reasons for each one. Sometimes the uprights are a little better for one thing or another. But just looking on the Energy Star website, I looked at a chest freezer that was 21.7 cubic feet, and it took 346 kilowatt hours per year to run, according to the Energy Star website. Now, an upright of about the same size, 21.2, just a little bit smaller, took 649 kilowatt hours per year to run. So not quite double, but substantially more. So if a chest freezer can work for you, they are more efficient.
And since I'm a science teacher, let's get into the science of why that is. Here's the reason why. All this air inside this freezer, it's cold. That means it's really, really dense. So when you open the lid of this freezer, all that cold air, because it's more dense than the surrounding air, it wants to sink. It stays in this freezer. You can see why this would be more efficient, because when I open the lid of my chest freezer here, this cold air, it just stays there. Now, if you had an upright freezer and you go and open that door, what does all the cold, dense air do? Well, it falls out of your freezer, and then warm air goes in the top and takes its place. That's why you might consider using a chest freezer instead of an upright freezer. They're just more efficient.
One of the important things that you need to understand is that you are not going to open that fridge or freezer unless you absolutely have to. Maybe that's going to be once every 2 or 3 days for a freezer. You're going to get out what you need, put it in an ice chest, and then close that back up and leave it, because every time you open that, it costs you.
And you don't want to, especially with an upright freezer, if you open that door 3 times a day, it's not going to last very long. So another tip that we can give you is if your freezer is empty, it's not full right now, by the way, don't do this when the power goes out. Do this before the power goes out. If your fridge or your freezer is not quite full, like mine isn't, what you can do is you can take a crate and fill it up full of water, these milk jugs here full of water, and then you put it in here. Now again, this is before the power goes out. You close it, you let all of that water freeze, and then what that does for you is it makes it so when the power goes out, you've got a whole bunch of ice in there that's going to keep your freezer cool. It also provides you with drinking water in case there is a drinking water shortage. You could pull that out and use it. But the principle is a full freezer is going to stay cold longer than an empty freezer, so fill it up with water and let that water freeze. The other benefit of this that is kind of nice is when you go on a road trip or you go camping, you've already got ice. You don't have to go to the store and buy ice. You can just pull one of those out and use it for your cooler and then put it back when you're done. So that's one of the great tips in keeping these freezers cold. Now the last thing we want to talk about is if you don't have some backup power supply like a generator or a battery bank, rest easy, because if you have a freezer and you keep that door closed, it's probably going to stay cool enough to be safe for about 2 days, 48 hours. Refrigerator is not quite so long, but if you do run out of time in a power outage and you know your food's going to go bad, then you better put on your stretchy pants and hurry and eat it all so it doesn't all go bad.
And now for the question of the day. How are you going to protect your food in a power outage? Comment below. And thanks for being part of the solution.